Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MCU Perspectives. And today we're going to be taking a look at the 20th movie to be released as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Ant-Man and the Wasp. And would you believe that I haven't actually seen this movie in full until this vlog? I'm not even joking. When this film was in the theaters, I did want to see it. I really did, especially with how it was marketed. Basically, it looked like it was going to be like a breath of fresh air. Like, with how Infinity War ended, you kind of were wondering how things were going to be for any films that happen between it and the next Avengers movie. And so when they started showing ads for Ant-Man, they kept saying, "Well, what was Ant-Man Scott Lang doing during Infinity War? Where was he?" And then one of the ads they show was just him making sounds into a fan. So yeah, that alone just kind of looked like the movie was going to be a breath of fresh air. And I did want to see it when it was in theaters, but just I never got around to it. And as a result, when it came out on DVD, my mother wanted to buy me a copy, and we were gonna sit down and eventually I did end up buying it to complete my MCU collection. But even when I did sit down and buy it, I still hadn't watched it in full, mostly because I was kind of saving up for, well, these vlogs, so to speak. So I hadn't seen it all. I hadn't seen it all. The closest I came to seeing it was when Endgame was still in theaters. My mom wanted to sit down and watch Infinity War to help get her up to speed, and then after that I wanted to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp since of stuff that happens in Infinity and that happens in Endgame. As a result, we did sit down and watch at least 2/3 of it, but we ultimately had to stop we ultimately had to stop because we had to head to the theater to see Endgame. I hadn't seen the film in full till today when I sat down to watch it. But with that being as such, what do I think of it as a whole since I hadn't seen it in theaters? Well, let's get to the spoilerific plot summary. So once again, sorry if it's long, but long movie, that's how it goes. So pretty much, like I said, the film is supposed to take place during Infinity War. Something that was offhandedly mentioned in Infinity War was that two of the heroes that helped out Captain America during the Civil War, in this case, Ant-Man and Hawkeye, they managed to get a plea deal going. And pretty much the deal was that they both be put under house arrest for 2 years, but once those 2 years are up, they'd get 3 years probation. But on top of this, they are not on top because of this. They're not allowed to interact with any extra normal people, any superheroes. Just pretty much, they have to cut off all ties to anybody that would pretty much give them any technology that you and I wouldn't have. So, which means Scott Lang can't contact Hank Pym and Hank and Hope, and Hawkeye can't contact any of his former Avengers friends. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. The dog came in, so I had to close the door. Anyways, I was saying, so pretty much ever since then, Scott and Hawkeye have been under house arrest. We won't be seeing what happened with Hawkeye until Endgame, but for Scott, pretty much in those 2 years, he's just kind of been doing things to pass the time. He's played some video games. In this case, like a band game. In this case, what's like a Guitar Hero game, one of those drum Guitar Hero games. He's found ways to try and keep his daughter Cassie entertained, as he still has the joint custody, as he actually does have a joint custody kind of joint custody, as he gets her every weekend. And so she comes over and so every weekend she comes over and they hang out and they just kind of do stuff. And on top of that, he's just kind of learned some close up magic. But pretty much, if at any point it looks like he's going to break a barrier, the FBI come knocking on his door and just sweep the place to ensure that he doesn't have anything out there that could help him break out. Sorry, I'm not liking how that looks. Looks like there's too much space above my head. Sorry about that. Anyways, I was saying, on top of this, he's pretty much lost all contact with Hank and Hope, as one, having contact with them at all would violate the terms of his plea deal, and on top of that, even if he couldn't contact them, unfortunately they aren't very willing to speak to them, as apparently when Captain America, when he was as the joint cap during Civil War, it was without their consent, so they didn't know about him helping Captain America during that event till after he got arrested. And because it was their technology he was using, that unfortunately puts them on the FBI's most wanted list. So yeah, they're pretty much so yeah, they really want nothing to do with Scott, so he's just kind of so pretty much he's just kind of been laying low for the last 2 years. However, this all kind of changes when one night when he's during his during this ritual as he's taking a bath, he kind of seems to drift off, and he has a dream of where he's back in the quantum realm. However, when he's there, he suddenly seems to get a vision of someone in a suit of a woman in a suit, and that vision suddenly changes to what looks like a memory of a woman of where he sees through the eyes of a woman who's going down a hallway and playing hide and seek with a little girl. And as a result, and so when the woman finds the little girl, she looks in a mirror, and it turns out that this woman is actually Janet, who we actually do see in this movie. As I guess the reason we didn't see her face in the last one was because they hadn't gotten an actress to play her yet. In this case, she's played by Michelle Pfeiffer. But once Scott sees, well, Janet's reflection back at him, he wakes up and he immediately tries calling Hank on a burner phone, although he doesn't seem to get any answer back. As he tells him, he has a vision of as he had a dream where he had a vision of Janet and that he thinks it might be important, but no one picks up, so he just hangs up and breaks the phone. However, later that night, he ends up getting hit by something, or just kind of hit by what looks like a dart, and he ends up passing out. And when he wakes up, he's in the passenger seat of a van with Hope in the driver's seat. As it turns out that and so Scott, of course, is starting to freak out because he's not supposed to be he's supposed to be leaving his house, or else the FBI will come knocking on his door. But it turns out they managed to get the ankle bracelet off of him, and they wound up putting it on an ant that they enlarged. That it's meant to mirror Scott's. That's meant to mirror all of Scott's. That's pretty much meant to mirror all of Scott's actions through the day. So if the FBI does start checking in on him, it will look like that everything's going fine. Also, it turns out that the van can shrink. So yeah. However, Scott is freaking out, but Hope tells him that she wants that they want that. But yeah, I forgot what happens. But pretty much, when he learns of what's going on and about the ants, Hope brings them to what is essentially their lab. Scott, of course, Scott is apologetic because of his action, because of him, they're now on the lam, but they really don't have a lot to don't have time to talk about that, as they end up going to what looks like this old abandoned building. They go inside, and Scott does apologize that they have to work at it here, but until they get to the lower basement and find that it's just full of all this high-tech equipment and this weird machine that they're working on that what they call a quantum tunnel. Because pretty much what happened is that since the last Ant-Man movie, when Scott managed to get out of the quantum realm, Hank has been thinking of ways to try and get into the quantum realm, and he had blueprints for an old machine that were lying around that he thinks could help. And that machine was this thing, a quantum tunneler. Pretty much what's going on is that as such, they've been trying to use it to enter the quantum realm and hopefully find Janet. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to get it to work. As the night prior, they did try starting it up, but it short-circuited and wound up overloading and short-circuited and just stopped working. However, for the millisecond that it was on, it did briefly go into the quantum realm, and then 5 minutes later, that's when Scott got the call. As such, they hypothesized that while Scott was in the quantum realm, Janet put something in his head, like this kind of message, a link to him, if you will. And as such, when they managed to activate a link that had been dormant until they accessed the quantum realm, which allowed them to get a small pinprick through, which allowed Janet to briefly connect with Scott. As such, they feel that while they still don't really like Scott right now, they think that he's necessary right now to getting Janet out of the quantum realm. As such, unfortunately, and they are able to confirm that it is Janet, as when Scott relays the memory, he explains that the memory was how the memory was chasing a girl into a red cabinet with horses on it, and it turns out that this is a memory that Hope and Janet have in common, as the little girl was Hope as a kid, and whenever they play hide and seek, that's always where she would hide. So, yeah, it does confirm that Scott is connected, so they do need him, whether they like it or not. As such, unfortunately, they don't. They still need because of what happened with the machine overloading. They need the proper. They need proper components in order to properly activate it. And unfortunately, they are missing one key component. And so before they can attempt to try and reconnect with the quantum realm, they need that component. They need. Hold on a second. Sorry, had to let the dog out. Anyway, as I was saying, they have to go to their. They pretty much have been getting all their components to build the tunnel through the black market from a guy named Sonny, who actually who we later learn has a connection to the FBI. Specifically, a guy who actually works under the guy that keeps track on Scott. I think his name is Wu, and I mean the guy who keeps track of Scott. I think his name is Wu. He's kind of sort of comic relief as in the scene where he's introduced when he and his men are going through Scott's house. Scott showed him close-up magic and he wanted to learn how to do it, so in a later scene we see him going online trying to learn close-up magic. It's kind of it's amusing, but pretty much through this guy they've been able to get their components, and so they need to go in to get their component. They need to go back to him to get the last component they need for the machine. As such, they go out. As such, they leave the lab, and it turns out the lab can actually shrink down via a remote, so they can just pick it up and put it in the van. As such, they get Scott back, and as such, Scott, Hope, and Hank all get into the van and head to where they can and head to go meet Happy. At least I think that. Oh no, his name is Sonny. His name is Sonny. Sorry, the guy's name is Sonny. However, they do still keep giving Scott crap for what he did in Germany, but he also says that he can't. But they also but he does say that he destroyed the suit so they couldn't track it back to Hank, though Hank freaks out about this because that was his life's work, so, yeah. But at the same time, they are still able, they do go to meet Sonny, and Hope Hope is apparently the go-between, as she has an alias named Summer who goes to see Sonny at every point, whenever they have their meetings. As that, she goes in, and they are able to keep track of her via ant cams, so to speak. But unfortunately, so she goes to see Sonny, and they do kind of talk, and it does seem jovial. She has a bunch of cash to hand over to get her last component. Only Sonny turns the tables, as it turns out that through his contact, he was able to learn that she is actually not the person that she's been saying she was. Summer, I think it was her alias, and that she's actually Hope Van Dyne. Don't ask me how this government agent knew that. Maybe he saw her, or he saw a photo or a security footage. I don't know. But bottom line, with the revelation that she's Hope Van Dyne, and with all the components they've been collecting, they know that this is probably that she's probably been building something that can open a gateway to the quantum realm, and he wants in. He thinks that, as he says, if she wants this stuff, then they got to get into business together, and so they can get access to the quantum realm and in turn gain access to quantum energy. Hope, of course, doesn't want to do this because they just want to build a quantum tunnel to get her mother back, but at the same time, this guy's a black market dealer. That's not something they want him getting his hands on. As such, she pretty much says, well, if you're not going to work on with me, then you're not getting the component. And so it looks like that she just that their business is concluded, and she leaves. However, it turns out that they had a plan B. As Sonny is leaving, he wants his men to check in, figure out what they've been wanting all these quantum components for, if it wasn't to gather energy, until they're suddenly attacked. By who? The Wasp, aka Hope Van Dyne. As we've actually see her in her Wasp outfit, and I actually do like the outfit. It's it is sort of like a more feminine version of the Ant-Man suit. Hold on. Admittedly, despite the fact that it had, DVD. I actually do like it. Like I said, it is kind of more of a female version of the Ant-Man costume. But at the same time, it looks more sleek, black. I do kind of wish they had yellow on it, especially since the logo, as you just saw, does have yellow on it. But I do like it. At least there's yellow in the eyes, so it's cool. And she's actually very proficient in it, as she's actually able to fight off all of Sonny's men, and even Sonny's men is able to perfectly use the shrinking technology. And on top of that, unlike Scott, she actually not only can she shrink, but again the wings can allow her to fly, and she has zappers she has zappers on her wrist so she can stun people. As such, she's able to pretty much take out all of Sonny's men and then grab the component that she needs. However, as she's leaving, she finds that someone else is there. As they see a person that seems to be phasing in and out of existence arriving. And this is where we're introduced to this movie's villain, a being called Ghost. At least that's the supervillain name. My prior experience with Ghost in this movie was like a cameo in Dark Avengers Volume 1, where Norman Osborn asked Ghost to go into Tony Stark's vault so that he could open up and get access to his Iron Man armor. Otherwise, I know nothing about Ghost except that Ghost can phase through walls. I think Ghost is a guy in the comics, but don't quote me on that. Again, I don't know. I really don't. And I really don't know. So I only knew that Ghost was kind of so I only knew Ghost by name and somewhat. But with that being said, I do like how Ghost is executed because Ghost powers in this movie are also that she, because the one in the movie is a girl, can phase through objects and seems to be in a state of what they call quantum entanglement, as she seems to be able to, as she later puts it, her particles are constantly disassembling and reassembling every day, which does hurt her, but it allows her to phase through objects. It allows her to disappear and reappear at will. She's like an ultimate spy, and she's unfortunately a problem when she actually does attack. When she attacks Hope to try and get the component from her. As such, Scott and Hank are watching all this, and they're freaking out. And Scott eventually says he's got to go out there and help her, but before he goes, Hank actually says he's got something for him, and so he pulls out. And so it turns out he actually built a second Ant-Man suit, although he says that this one's not exactly complete and is not fully functioning. As such, Scott ends up putting it on, and so he runs in with Ant-Man and helps Hope fight off Ghost. Fend off Ghost, but while they're having a moment, Ghost got away and wound up going out to the van where she pretty much threatened Hank to give her the lab. As such, when they both get out there, Hank says that she stole the lab, and so they have to drive away before any feds show up. As such, they realize that they have to find a way to track the lab, but unfortunately, things are still going wrong, and they have no place where they can hide out. They can't go back to Scott's place because they could get the FBI on their tail because they're still looking for Hope and Hank. So Scott actually has an alternative. As you see, it turns out in the 2 years since Ant-Man, it turns out that Scott, Luis, and their friends have actually founded a security firm, which we later learn is actually failing, and they're kind of broke. And if they don't get this one client, then their whole service goes down the tubes. But whatever. So they go there to try and hunker down, and they unfortunately don't know. And somehow Luis knows about what happened to them. But at the same time, they realize that. But they still have to worry about priorities. Although Scott does briefly complain about how his desk is really just a table that Luis bought not a retailer, but I don't know. Either way, it's a cheap desk that he got cheap. And I know I said cheap twice there, but that's exactly what it is. It's cheap. It's a cheap-looking desk, and the only reason he got it was because it was cheap. Okay, sorry, briefly distracted. Anyway, so pretty much they realize they need to find a way to track the lab, and the lab does have technologies that would allow them to track it if it was ever stolen, but unfortunately, Ghost, whoever she is smart and was able to deactivate them. So they need to find another way of doing this, and they're wondering who else would know the way. And so Hank says that there is one person that'd be able to help them, and as such, Scott, Hank, and Hope end up going to a college where they meet one of Hank's former colleagues. In this case, a man by the name of Bill Foster, who in the comics is known as Goliath. When I first saw the first 2/3 of this movie, I had no idea who that guy was. I do now know who he is. And my only exposure to him was in Civil War. And if you've read Civil War, you know that it didn't end well for him. And that is all I'm going to say on the matter. One more time, sorry. Sorry, Doug jumped on the bed, and so I had to close the door and readjust my tablet. Anyway, so, yeah, enough about the comics. We're focusing on this movie. As such, they arrive, and pretty much the whole idea is that Bill worked with Hank Hank and Bill did work with each other, but Hank eventually fired him, though Bill says that he quit. And both pretty much agree and Bill pretty much says it was for the best. He didn't like Hank, and Hank didn't like him. So, yeah, as we quickly learn, Hank did not make friends. A lot. Apparently, he wasn't just a dick to everyone he wasn't just a dick to people in S.H.I.E.L.D., he was a dick to a lot of people. Which I think is consistent with the comics. Don't quote me on that. But either way, he says that even if he was willing to help, he doesn't have the components necessary. He does offer a solution, as apparently he can do something to their tracking equipment that would be able to allow them to track the lab, but they need they still need certain components that he unfortunately doesn't have. And before they can even talk about this further, it turns out that the feds are now arriving at the college. As it turns out, college security actually spotted Hank and Hope, and while they didn't recognize Scott because their only disguises were just baseball caps and sunglasses, Hank and Hope are still on the top of the feds list. So yeah, they're still definitely a big So yeah, they definitely. So of course the feds are going to arrive. As such, the three manage to escape, and Bill does cover for them. But unfortunately, they still don't have the components, and they think that the only component. And unfortunately, they're kind of bereft of that. They did have Hank said he did have the components, but in the old suits. But thanks to the upgrades they made, they're no longer there. To which Scott replies, "Actually, there is one way they can do that." It turns out that he actually didn't have the suit destroyed, which gets just as visceral reaction out of Hank because again the feds could have used that, but it turns out he sent it to Luis and had it hidden in a safe place. In this case, it's a little trophy that his daughter Cassie got him that says "World's Best Grandma." Unfortunately, though, Cassie wound up taking the trophy to show and tell that day, so they have to get into her school and get it out of there. They do manage to get in, though we do kind of get one of the thing. But we get to what I consider one of the flaws in this movie, as it turns out that with a malfunctioning suit, Scott unfortunately keeps shrinking and growing at random. Sometimes he gets big, sometimes he gets small, and for the duration of their invasion of the school, he's the size of a child. So it's a little annoying. But through wacky hijinks, they do manage to get to Cassie's classroom while she's at recess, I think, or at lunch. I don't know. And they do manage to get the trophy where the original Ant-Man suit is. They grab it, and they slowly manage to get in, and they are able to tweak the track, and so they are able to use the technology to tweak the tracker, they are able to use the technology to tweak the tracker so they can find the lab. As such, Scott and Hope get into their superhero get into their suits and try and go to this building where they're trying to and do manage to infiltrate this building. Before that, we do get some nice little moment between Scott and Hope. And one strength I like about this movie is that the film actually does further their relationship in this case, as Hope actually talks about how Scott does apologize, and Hope says that they train together, work together, so she's surprised that he didn't ask for her help. And so he has, well, if I did ask for help, would you have offered it? And she said, well, if you did, then you wouldn't have gotten caught. And it's a nice little moment, nice little banter between them. It's nice. So, but anyway, they do manage to get into the base, which is this nice little house in the middle of the woods. And so they manage to get out there, and they end up seeing Ghost outside of her costume. Only she seems to be inside this strange containment cell, where she's resting, and she seems to be She seems to be being washed with waves, making them think that maybe. But either way, they are still able to find the lab. But when they try and grab it, they look towards the containment cell and find that Ghost is gone. As such, they go turn around. It turns out Ghost is right there, and she knocks them out. And so later on, Scott wakes up and finds himself, Hope, and Hank all tied to chairs. And it turns out that Ghost is actually after the same thing that these guys are after. She wants access to the quantum realm because she wants to get the Janet, but whereas Hank, Hope, and Scott want to save her, want to get her out of the quantum realm, she wants her for a different reason. And again, because Scott is the one with the connection to the quantum realm, she needs what's in his head. And which gets even worse when it turns out that Bill Foster is on her side as she wakes them up. And this is kind of where we get an explanation on what's going on and what happened. It turns out that Hope's father, Ghost's father, turns out Ghost's real name is Ava. Pretty much her father was another colleague of Hank's. A colleague that Hank wound up firing and discrediting during a point when wound up firing and discrediting. Hank says that he did it because the guy was stealing equipment and technology, but Ava says that he was fired and that he fired the guy because he dared disagree with Hank Pym. However, even when the guy was fired, he still continued his research and wound up building his own quantum tunnel. But like with Hank and Hope's device, it wasn't fully operational. But whereas their overload didn't cause any major damage, when his overloaded, it turns out the warehouse they were keeping it started to go nuts. The guy tried telling Ava and her mother to try and get out of there, but Ava, being a dumb kid, wound up running back to get him, which resulted in her and her parents still being in the lab when the place just went boom. As such, when rescue workers came, they found Ava alive and fine, but unfortunately her parents didn't survive the encounter. To make matters worse, it turns out all the energy from the quantum realm wound up affecting Ava and what gave her her superpowers, which pretty much put her out of phase with almost the whole world. I say almost because she can still walk around, still lie on stuff, but if you try touching her, if she tries grabbing something, either your hands will phase right through her, or her hands will phase right through something else. As a result of this, S.H.I.E.L.D. wound up getting wind of this girl who could phase through objects, and so they sent Bill to go bring her in. Because this is Shield back when they didn't know that Hydra was there. Shield wound up seeing an opportunity with her and started training her. They wound up creating her a suit, her ghost suit which was able to stabilize her ability, which was able to stabilize her form, and trained her, allowing her to use her abilities in ways for Shield, to spy, to capture, to apprehend, and in some cases even kill. But unfortunately, she participated, and she went along with it willingly because they promised they'd be able to cure her. Unfortunately, she eventually did learn that they weren't going to cure her, and on top of that, after the events of Winter Soldier, when S.H.I.E.L.D. went under, she didn't have anywhere to go. As such, Bill took her in, and they've been trying to find ways to stabilize her condition because as time goes by, it's just getting worse and worse, to the point where, as we learn, if something isn't done soon, within a matter of 2 weeks, her entire form will eventually just fall apart at the molecular level. Even Ava says, it hurts. So they're trying to find any ways they can do that, which is where the quantum tunnel comes in. They believe that they also believe that Janet is alive down in the quantum realm, but with all the years that she spent down there, she's most likely absorbed a lot of quantum energy. They think that if they can access the quantum tunnel and find Janet themselves, they can hook the quantum tunnel up to her cell and use the quantum energy to stabilize her form and keep her together. Though, of course, the good guys don't want this, because if she does this, it could destroy Janet on a molecular level. It could also destroy Janet on a molecular level. Something that Bill Foster isn't exactly okay with doing, but time is running out, and as we see in the rest of the film, Ava's just getting more and more desperate because this is her life on the line here. As such, during this, Hank seems to have a heart attack, and they say he needs his medications, which are in a little Altoid can he's been carrying with him. And so when they go to get them, and so Bill goes to get the Altoid, but when she opens it up, ants suddenly spring out and grow to giant size, allowing them to be briefly distracted, and allowing Hope and Hank and Scott to get free, grab the lab, and get the heck out of there. Of course, Ghost is pissed by this because she really needs that quantum energy, but she briefly considers using Scott's daughter as collateral to get him to cooperate and give her access to the lab. But Bill says, "Don't you dare do that. She's an innocent. She has nothing to do with this. If you try using that, I'm not going to help you anymore." As such, Ava concedes, but she says that I keep getting the names mixed up. I'm so sorry. Ava does concede to this, but she says that there are other ways that she can get help. In the meantime, they set up the lab at some other place in the woods as they're able to try and as they use the component they got from Sunny to try and access the quantum realm again. However, during that time, Luis calls Scott as they need his help with something, and Scott, is in the middle of something important, so he can't help out. So he tells Luis where he is, so Luis goes to see him. However, it turns out that Sunny has not given up the hunt himself. He wants the access to the quantum realm himself to get the quantum energy, and so he and his men corner Luis and the other two guys. Sorry, I still don't remember their names, and pretty much give them what is essentially a truth serum, just so that they'll blab about everything. And while Luis, in his own way, does kind of keep them distracted about how things are going, eventually he does blab that Scott and co are in the woods, which is also good because it turns out that Ava in her ghost uniform was actually listening in as well, and so when she overheard that, she makes her appearance known and goes to the woods herself. Sonny realizes that they can't go out there, that they can't just go after that time is of the essence, and so he contacts his informant in the FBI to let them know what's going on. As such, the informant is able to try and tell the higher up, to try and tell Wu, his name is Wu, about Scott, how they have a lead on Scott, Hank, and Hope, so they're able to try, and so they can try and get out of the lab, while Sonny himself wants to go out there and get access to the lab and try and get the lab. In the meantime, though, Hank and Hope are able to get the quantum tunnel up and running, and pretty much all they need to do is just open it up enough so they can get a connection to Scott, so they can find out where Janet is. And at first, it doesn't seem to be working until Scott starts actually going to controls and starts messing with them, saying that he's got to get the algorithm right and that he knows because he's had 30 years to do this. At which point they realize that it's not Scott in the driver's seat right now, it's actually Janet, using the link that she sent to Scott to temporarily take control of his body. As such, Janet through Scott is able to get a proper algorithm in, and says that that with these coordinates they can try and track her down, and so they're able to adjust the machine to be able to track her down by her signal, as they're able to follow it back to where she is in the quantum realm. Although Janet says that they only have 2 hours before the probability field shift, and it will be centuries before it's back in the proper position. So this is pretty much just their only shot at getting Janet home. As such, they're able to get the connections routed so they can try and follow Janet. But by the time they're doing it, Scott gets back in control and everything's back to normal. However, as such, their plan is initially to send Hope into the quantum realm, but before they can do anything, Scott gets a call from Louise telling him that the feds are on the way both to his house and to the woods, and so is Ghost and Sonny. As such, Scott says he has to cut and run, or else if they find out he's not home, then pretty much the deal he made is out of the window, because at this point he had like 2 days left before his parole was up. So at this point he's not. So yeah, he's got to be at the house wearing the anklet wearing the anklet when they arrive, or else he's screwed. While Janet and Hank aren't happy with this at all, even when Scott says he needs to borrow the suit, they still need to go forward with this if they need to do this. In the meantime, this is Scott's fault since he told Louise where they were. As such, Scott makes a run for it and uses the suit and takes the MN suit to get a quick ride back to his house, where he does manage to get there before the feds arrive, as well as his ex-wife, the cop boyfriend, and his daughter, who are there to visit because it turns out Cassie lost lost some soccer shoes. But either way, the FBI is there, but thankfully Scott was there, and his cover was that he was extremely sick, which Cassie tries to use when she sees the giant ant with her father's ankle bracelet on it. But either way, that does fool the FBI when they come around, as Scott seems to be there. He seems to be sick. He's still wearing the ankle bracelet. Everything's fine. But in the meantime, Cassie says that she asks Scott how long he's been Ant-Man for. How long has he been Ant-Man? He says he's been doing it for a couple days, but they do have a nice little heart-to-heart. Cassie says that maybe he could use a partner out there. He says that he had one at Hope, though Cassie was referring to herself. But as such, Cassie says that I'm gonna pause this right now because I'm gonna need to pause it in a few minutes, and if I don't do it now, there's gonna be a lot of disturbances. Alright, disturbances avoided. Back to what I was talking about. Either way, so anyway, like I was saying, Scott and Cassie have a talk, and it does convince Scott that he needs to get back out there and sit and help Hank and Hope. I guess he's able to get the ankle bracelet back on the giant ant, wherever that thing went. But however, unfortunately, as Hank and Hope are trying to change locations as well, when the instant they shrink the lab down, the feds arrive and immediately arrest them. As such, Sonny's informant does try grabbing the lab and does try to take it away, to start trying to take it away, but Ghost reaches him and then uses her powers to kill him and take the lab. As such, Hope and Hank are still locked up, and one of the guys says that Wu will see them in about an hour, but even then, their window of time to get to the quantum realm is still shrinking little by little. They are very much running out of time. So as such, Hope is able to break her and Hank out of their shackles because she had a lockpick in her mouth, but before she can and her plan is to throw one of their little shrinking things to shrink a wall, which is a load-bearing wall, and make a run for it. But before she can do that, her suit suddenly appears. As they look to the ceiling, it shows that there's a trail of ants that Scott is controlling to get them out, as he's able to get Janet her Wasp suit, while he gets Hank an FBI uniform so they can both just sneak out. As such, they both manage to make it out to the van, and so they get away, and they're trying to figure out where exactly the lab is. Thankfully, Hank has another tracking method, as he has his ants as he actually attuned his ants to where the lab was, so now they can just follow the ants, as they are now literally forming an arrow that allows them to follow them to the lab. Unfortunately, they have to kind of make a plan to get in there because they know it's not going to be easy. As such, Hank, and of course, because pretty much they have to find a way in. They have to make sure that Bill and Ava don't activate the quantum tunneler and get through. And on top of that, they have to be weary of just having to. On top of that, they have to worry about Ghost, because she's obviously going to be a problem. However, and on top of that, they have to find a way of getting Hope back out of the quantum realm when they do that, which Hank responds, "I'm going to go in." Which kind of, as he thinks that maybe Hope would be better served out there with her suit, but he wants, and he says he'll have to go in himself, especially since their window of opportunity is still shrinking. Hold on one more second. This is the last time, I promise. Sorry about that. Heavy stuff going on at the house. Anyway, as I was saying, Hank says he's going to go in while Hope stays out but they still need a plan to get inside, because they still need a plan to get Bill and Ava away from the tunnel, while also trying to keep track, while getting Hank in. As such, Scott is able to send in some ants to sabotage the equipment, while Bill is trying to activate it, because they still have the coordinates for Janet. As such, when it short circuits, Ava goes out and does find Scott. And they get into a fight, which Scott isn't doing so well with because his suit's still malfunctioning. However, while he's distracted, Hank goes in to the main lab and has and is able to use the giant ants to keep Bill away from the controls, while he gets into his suit and gets everything ready. Although he does tell Bill that he understands that he wants to help Ava, and he promises that once he gets Janet back, he will help him find a cure for Ava's condition. As such, he gets into this pod. It's kind of a pod, kind of a jet or whatever. And so he's able to hone in on Janet's location, which again has now gotten to the 15. Now they only have 15 minutes left before they lose said location. And so when they go in, I know I'm gonna have to pause this again. I heard a jingling out there. I know he's gonna come back in. Or he's gonna want to come back in. And I closed that door. So, yeah, that's gonna be something. Heads up. Sorry about all the interruptions. I really am. I don't like doing this. Fair warning, I'm probably gonna have to pause this again because I let my dog out in front. He's probably gonna want to come back in. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try to make this quick. Either way, yeah, that was pretty much the plan. Pretty much Scott fighting Ava was pretty much just the whole plan in the first place. As they end up, in the distraction, they're able to get the remote that controls the lab. They're able to control the lab's size, and they're able to shrink it while Ghost is outside the lab, and while Hank is in the quantum realm. Got sent to the quantum realm. As such, Luis and Hope grab the lab and get into the van and drive away, causing Ghost to chase after them. And Bill's no longer in the lab. He was ushered out by the ants, so he's not shrunken in there as well. But as they're going, it turns out that Sonny's forces are still after them because they want access to the quantum realm, which ends up leading to a chase scene throughout San Francisco, which is actually pretty fun and nice to watch, as they're just constantly driving all around, avoiding everything. As we see that Janet has been able to weaponize some of those grow things, anything she stabs with it will grow or shrink it by her command, and she ends up using it to try and shoot some of Sonny's people, either shrinking their devices or even making a Pez dispenser grow to the point where it becomes a distraction. It ends up becoming an impediment. And this is also where we get our Stan Lee cameos during the chase. One guy ends up driving by a car, and as Janet tries to zap him, she ends up zapping Stan Lee's car, and so Stan Lee's car as he was trying to get into it. Which, yeah. It's just, yeah. But either way, yeah, eventually. However, Ghost ends up getting involved, and so Ghost gets involved, and she manages to hijack a car and ends up she didn't hijack a car, she was in a motorcycle, but she did manage to get into the lab. But she was able to get in the van, and so she fights Louis. And so as Scott managed to get in as well, though again his suit's still malfunctioning. but they manage to eventually get him. But the fight eventually results in Scott getting knocked outside the van and Ghost getting the lab and getting out. Lab getting out and getting lab and getting out. But she ends up going into a. But she ends up getting and she jumps into a nearby truck, which is just kind of a construction car, and so Scott goes in after her. And so Scott goes after her, and I may be getting these details wrong, so I might be getting some of these details wrong. Again, this is the first time I've seen this part of this movie, so I'm probably gonna get a few details wrong here and there. I apologize in advance. But the fight continues on, and Scott just seems to continue getting worse as the suit ends up making him grow, and the end result is that Ghost ends up once again losing the lab, and it winds up getting in the hands of Sonny, who tries running away with it. Louise, unfortunately, is now incapacitated. The van that Louise and Hope are using is incapacitated, and Hope manages to get away. Hope ends up using her suit to get out of there and try and chase after them, while Scott is also going after Sonny. In the meantime, though, all their activities are being recorded and being broadcast on the news. So Cassie, her mom, and the cop stepdad are watching this on the news, while the FBI is also watching this and seeing it all go down, and because Scott's in the Ant-Man suit, yeah, this is getting their attention. Although they probably they say this later at the boat scene. But either way, yeah, they realize that may be Scott. So, and it turns out that Wu is a little incompetent, and he just kind of wants a win. So he's kind of okay with it. So he's actually okay with arresting Scott. And Hank and Hope kind of knocked him down a little bit. But in the meantime, though, Scott ends up chasing after Sonny, but Sonny, as he was getting away, managed to get to a pier and get a ticket onto a boat that's going out to the harbor. As Scott is able to take advantage of, is able to use a suit again, and so it makes him, and he used it to make himself grow even larger and just walk right out to the boat and then just take the lab right out of Sonny's hands. As such, he does try walking back to the. As such, he walks right back to shore, and in the meantime, in the quantum realm, we see Hank is slowly going more and more, and we actually we get a nice little scene as we see him going down layers upon layers in the quantum realm, and it's actually pretty nice to look at. They did put some thought in how the quantum realm looked, and so it's actually pretty nice, majestic, and actually really cool to look at. Eventually, though, the machine ends up losing its connection a bit, so we do get to take in some more of it before he shrinks down. And we actually do see the quantum realm, and it is actually really creative and really strange. Like, everything's kind of shifting out, nothing's really standing in place, and Scott even warned Hank before he went in that when you're in the quantum realm, it kind of messes with your mind a little. As such, he lands his ship down, and he's wearing a suit to try and protect him from the quantum realm's effects, but as he's wandering around, eventually a timer hits 0, and he seems to have lost everything, and he seems to have lost the signal entirely. And around that time, however, the quantum realm starts affecting his mind as he starts going insane and enters kind of a hallucination where he's back in his house and he sees these people he knows, like Bill, Scott, Hope, all there saying he's lost, until he encounters someone in a hood, someone that seems to be in the shadows. He's kind of freaking out. It kind of looks like maybe it's like an illusion of Ghost there to taunt him. Only when it reaches out to him, it touches his forehead, and it spews these lights that brings him back to reality. And it turns out this person in the hood is Janet, now having looked visibly older. And I kind of guessed it was Janet when I saw her, as you could see a bit of her wasp wing sticking out. But it's a very tearful reunion, and they're just happy to see each other, and it's just nice, all good, all sweet and hugging. And so they get back to the ship. Although Hank does ask Janet how she was able to do that, as apparently when you spend enough time in the quantum realm, it changes you, gives you abilities. How she says it evolves you. In this case, she in her time in the quantum realm has given her abilities to she's given her some sort of strange healing ability, so to speak, because she was able to use it to bring Hank back to reality. Unfortunately, though, that when they get back to their ship, the lab is still shrunk, so they don't have any point of going back yet. And unfortunately, as Scott is walking back to the shore, fatigue is starting to hit him. As it turns out that the more giant you get, when you go to the giant mode on the suit, it starts to affect you physically. When he gets closer and closer to shore, he's just getting more and more tired. As such, Hope is seeing all this, and while he's able to put the lab down on the dry land, Scott ends up fainting and falls right back into the bay. Hope realizes that he's kind of running out of options. That down there he's running out of air, so she flies in after him, and she's able to mess with the equipment and able to shrink him down so she can get him out of the water. In the meantime, Louise shows up. Louise shows up and in a new car because the van was totaled, and it turns out they had like a Hot Wheels track full of other shrunken cars, which one of them he used to get out of there. But as he's going through, he sees the lab and tries to get it, but Ghost ends up grabbing the lab first and makes it grow right there in the middle of the street. As such, she goes back in, and Bill Foster manages to catch up with her as she starts messing with the equipment. As now that the lab's big again, Hank and Hope have a connection to get back to the reality, and so they're able to take the ship and head out of the quantum realm. But when Bill sees this and goes into the lab, he tries to talk Ava down on this, as he does start to realize that doing this is probably not a good idea because this will kill Janet in the long run. But at this point, Ava's just getting more and more desperate because she thinks, no, we have to do this now. I'm running out of time. This is the only way. And even when Bill tells her you can't do this, she just throws him aside and turns it on anyway, hooking up the quantum tunneler to her stabilization chamber as she just goes inside, and it starts sucking the quantum energy right out of Janet, and we do briefly see her as it is affecting her. However, Hope is able to revive Scott, and they do get a nice little moment where they start kissing, and it's all nice. But they see that everything, but as such, they run right back into the lab, and of course they see Ava. And they see what Ava's doing, and so Scott goes right in and Scott goes in and unplugs everything. As such, Ava just gets really pissed off at this. And so she and Scott end up getting, and so she tries fighting Scott, only for Hope to come in, and we get a nice little tag team as they both are able to coordinate and just keeps fighting Hope, constantly getting her off balance. But eventually though, the fight ends up knocking Scott off the terminal because there's a landing pad on the tunnel, the quantum tunnel, as Hank and Janet are flying in. As so Scott's able to grow enough so that he's able to get Hope and push her out of the way. Whereas the rocket just flies in and just hits Ava, knocking her into some equipment. As such, Janet and Hank come out, and we get a nice little tearful reunion as Janet sees Hope, and they just kind of hug and embrace, and they're just happy. There's the bark. Sorry. That is hopefully the last interruption. So anyway, tearful reunion. Hank gets out and he's fine, but Janet ends up seeing that Ava is still destabilizing. And so she goes over to her and uses her powers to stabilize her. As it turns out, she is able to use her energy to keep her stable without killing herself. So Ava is now cured, and it actually looks fine. In the meantime, outside the lab, Sonny and his guys run into Luis, and, they don't have any more use for him, and at this point he's just a loose thread. But that ultimately gets knocked out as they all get tased by the other guys, Luis and Scott's pals that are helping set up the security firm, allowing them to tie them up and even inject some of the truth serum into them, which just caused them to blab about everything about their whole legal operation. As such, Scott and Co. manage to get out, but they realize the feds are probably on their way here, so they need to get out. So they need to find a way to get Scott back to his house before the feds arrive. As such, their plan is that they have Scott, as they get the Ant-Man suit and then pretty much make it big and stick outside of a building to make it look like he's hiding there. And of course, through the news reports, they're able to say that a giant man is somewhere in San Francisco, and of course, Wu and his men are able to track the suit down. And Wu starts thinking that this is Scott, and he even starts calling him, "You might as well come down now. We got you. There's nowhere to run." At which point, the suit just deflates, and they realize that this was just a distraction as they make a run for it. As they realize that Scott's on his way back to his house. As such, once they're gone, they shrink the suit back down, and Hope flies in and picks it up. In the meantime, though, and so when Wu and his men get back to Scott's house, they find him there just playing his drumming game. And so, without any proof that he actually left the house and that the giant man could have been anybody in the suit, they pretty much let him go. But Wu tells him that he's got to be careful because he could slip up and he'll be there. Because he could slip up one day, and so he'll be there. And so Wu will be there if he does. Though it kind of gets more banterish. As such, we get a nice little happy ending as now Scott's able to be with his daughter again without worrying about being under house arrest. We see Hank and Janet now out putting their hope on what looks like a nice little beach as they set it up and they're ready to just kind of enjoy retirement. And the last scene we see in the movie is we see Scott and Hope sitting in a car watching this scary movie with Cassie in the backseat, and they're all just having nice. It's all just a nice little family moment. until the moth flies on the window, and as Scott tries honking it away, the moth ends up taking it as a mating call and starts humping the car, revealing that they're actually in a small car watching on a laptop. But so yeah. But of course, Marvel film, we still got our post credits and got pre credits and post credits endings. As our post credits ending is just the giant ant playing on the drums, so it's still doing what it's doing. But our during the credits ending is actually the most big plot important one, as we see Hank, Janet, and Hope setting up a new quantum tunneler. This one, a miniature variety that's set up in the back of their van. What their plan is that while they were able to heal Ava, they want to be able to keep her stable. So they want to go into the quantum realm and get what they call healing particles and store it inside a canister. Oh yeah, by the way, that's a nice little thing I like, as Ava is still a little weak, and she thinks that, and now that she's healed, she is ready and willing to face punishment for her crimes, but Bill says that he's not going to leave her for any other he's not going to leave her no matter what, and it's a nice little moment. But pretty much, yeah, they're just going to get some healing particles to try and keep her stable. As such, their plan is to just send Scott in, grab the stuff, and then they'll just pull him back out with the equipment. So just easy peasy. As such, they send Scott in through the van, and they're able to set up communication. And so things seem to be going rather well. As Scott's in the quantum realm, has a device that absorbs all the healing particles that they need for Ghost, and so they're able to contact via comms, and Scott is able to ask him to try and pull him out. Only before they can do that, suddenly the radio goes silent. Scott's just asking, "Hey guys, where are you? Where are you? This isn't funny." And it turns out that while he was in the quantum realm, the snap happened. As all we see of Hope, Hank, and Janet is dust as it settles on the ground, while Scott is asking where are they over the comms. So, yeah. But so on the whole, what do I think of this movie? I think it's cute. Don't get me wrong, I think the first Ant-Man is better, but this movie, for what it is, I think is a nice little breath of fresh air. Don't you dare. Just lie there and be cute. Like, Infinity War, like, it feels like this is just some of them trying to take a breather after Infinity War, because Infinity War was a big deal. Like, that was a film that had been built up for a decade, had all these big giant stakes in it, it covered so much ground in the MCU, and when it was over, it was a very big, it had very large consequences. There was a very big thing going on, and it did kind of leave you feeling like, oh my god, where can they go from here? As such, this film, I feel, is meant to be kind of a breath of fresh air, and it's constantly showing it. Even from the trailers, it's showing that it's just trying to be funny, trying to be a fun time, and that's what I think it is. It's just a nice, cute little fun time. Like, it's not as good as the first movie, but for what we get here, it is still nice. Like, for starters, the villain. Ghost, I think, is actually a rather nice villain, and that's mostly because, unlike other villains, her reasons for why she's doing the things she's doing aren't while selfish, they're more understandable. Other villains have usually wanted to get power or control, or just kind of been selfish morons. Or in the case of Thanos, they're pretty much willing to do one horrible thing because they think in the long run it'll help everyone else. Okay, I'm gonna pause this one more time because if you can see, I kind of look like a phantom like this. Hold on, I'm getting a light. There we go. It may not be great, but it works. Anyway, as I was saying, it like I said, the film feels like a nice breath of fresh air. And again, going back to Ghost, yeah, that was what I was talking about. But in a way, it does make sense because this is her very existence on the line. Gives her her superpowers are also slowly killing her, and as such, you do understand why she gets more and more desperate throughout the film. Because she sees this opportunity to be able to finally stabilize her, keep her in place, keep her together, and as a result of this, you do understand why she starts disregarding other people. Why she's willing to use Cassie as a bargaining chip for Scott, though that gets shot down. Why when Bill tries talking her out of it, when he thinks that there could be other ways, she's willing to throw him aside because the clock is ticking on her, it hurts. The process actually physically hurts her. And as a result of this, you can actually feel that as the film goes on, she gets more and more desperate. And as things continue going wrong, you see her just getting more and more desperate to try and get access to the quantum realm. Because even if it does hurt someone in the long run, it makes sense. She's afraid. She's scared. And she's desperate to find anything to keep herself alive. And so when finally presented with that, you understand why she's willing to go to such extreme lengths to do it. And it's not because she's a bad person, she's just afraid. And it does, and even in the long run, when she does finally get stabilized, she actually is willing to face punishment for her crimes because she has gotten what she wanted and no one had to get hurt to do it. So it kind of makes sense why she'd be willing to do it, because it makes sense why she would be more kind of redeemed. As for the other character, so I like that. I like her. As for the other characters, they actually do have some nice arcs. We still get more development with Scott and Hope and their relationship, and we do get some nice moments between them. Nice little bantering, nice little bickering, and we do still get. And of course, there is kind of the arc between Scott trying to mend the bridge that with Hank and Hope after Civil War. So so there is some tension there, but but it is nice seeing them rebuild that. And I'd also like the partner dynamic between Scott and Hope when they're in their when they're actually going out doing superhero stuff. That's nice. I like that. On top of that, there is more humor to be found in here. Like even in the action scenes with a giant Pez dispenser just being thrown out there, that's actually kind of fun. That's kind of funny that's kind of nice to watch, especially since they're using it as a weapon. That's like during the interrogation scene where Scott, Hope, and Tank have been captured by Bill and Ava. At one point, Scott ends up getting a text. It gets a text, and it's just like this goofy little text that keeps interrupting the speech. So finally, Bill ends up just goes to check it, and even while he tries to ignore it, Cassie ends up calling in. So they have to let Scott take the call. It's nice. I like that. And of course, we got Luis and the whole and their crew. And they're still funny. They're still enjoyable and nice to watch. I still don't remember the other two guys' names. I'm sorry, but I just don't. And of course, we still get the arc, and there are still some good moments here and there. We still get, and of course, the action is still really fun and kick-ass to watch. I think my favorite thing in the film is actually the design of the quantum realm. It looks really creative and really nice, and definitely does feel otherworldly and strange, while still being wondrous and amazing to watch. And there is some nice heart there, especially when you see Janet get brought back. I think my biggest problem, however, with this film that keeps it from being as good as the first is that it feels really effing cluttered, and that's not a good thing at all in this movie. Like with Iron Man 2, there's quite a few plots that are going on in this movie. Like, you got Scott being under house arrest and having to keep himself under the radar. You got their journey to try and get get Janet out of the quantum realm. You got Ghost wanting to keep herself stable. You got Luis you got the security firm with Luis and how they have to make sure that goes well. And then you got Sonny, who, honest to God, I think really is just tacked on in this movie. Sonny is meant to be a more villainous version of the comic relief, but honestly, he didn't feel like much of a big threat in this movie. He was a hindrance, a distraction at best. Otherwise, the real threat was Ghost and Bill. That was... Unfortunately, this leads to the film feeling very cluttered and all over the place in terms of its tone. And it doesn't really result... And as a result of this, it feels like there's so much to keep track of, and all of it doesn't really mesh as well. And while there are still some stuff to keep track of when everything goes in place, I feel like Iron Man 2 kind of did this whole thing better, as with Iron Man 2, you did still have the central thing with Tony and him slowly dying. That one I did feel was better, and I think the closest we got to that was Ghost, which you understand, because again, good villain and good motivation, it makes sense. And we still get and of course we do still have some nice heart, and there is still something to lose with Scott, but either way, but the whole thing with Scott feels kind of like slightly a bit of an afterthought. The bigger focus is on getting Janet out of the quantum realm. The stuff of Scott is important, but it doesn't feel as important as pulling Hope's mother / Hank's wife out of this miniature realm that only has a limited window of opportunity to get to, while at the same time, and that even from her perspective, she's been down there for like 30 years. So yeah, things are not exactly. So yeah, it feels like that's kind of pushed aside. So yeah, that's a flaw with the movie. It does feel kind of lacking in that regard. Another problem I noticed, and another big problem I note, and this again, Sonny. Don't like Sonny. He's meant to be comic relief, but all he's really there to be is a distraction. Not kind of a hindrance, but otherwise, he wasn't entertaining to watch. He was annoying, and I didn't like him. Like at all. I feel like that if you took Sonny out of the movie, you could have still kept Ghost in, or maybe replaced Sonny with just more FBI agents trying to track down Hope and Hank. And I don't think anything would have been lost in the movie. At all. At best, all Sonny's presence did was that when Scott and Luis's security firm take credit for capturing them, it gets them more attention, and thus the client they've been trying to net does want to bring them on as client, does want to bring them on for security, so their business is saved. But otherwise, yeah, it doesn't exactly help. I feel like that you could take Sonny out, and any revisions that you need to make would be very easy to make. On top of that, another problem I didn't like is, ironically, the running gag with Scott. Well, not ironically. It's not ironic at all. But one of the problems I have is with the running gag with Scott and his malfunctioning suit. I didn't like that. That was annoying, and I thought it was not really that funny. If anything, it just kind of felt dumb when at certain points when his suit wasn't at full strength and he was just kind of struggling more. Now, again, to be fair, the movie, this did make some more scenes tense as it allowed him to kind of as it allowed him to be more dangerous since now he wasn't at full power, but it kind of made certain scenes annoying and certain hijinks not work as well. It did have some humor to it, especially kind of in the school scene where Scott got shrunk and immediately Hope and Hank just start giving him crap, and it's just funny. But other scenes, like during the action scenes when it's malfunctioning there, it does provide a problem to overcome, but it ultimately becomes more of an annoyance. Then it does become more of an annoyance, and I don't really like that. But at the end of the day, though, I still think there's enough in this movie to still make it entertaining. Like, while the running gag with Scott and the Scott in the malfunctioning suit wasn't funny, there's still plenty of other jokes that I think work out. Luis is still fun to have around, especially when under the truth serum he starts going into his big exposition as he starts talking about how he met Scott. As when Sonny asks him where Scott is, instead he starts talking about how he met Scott, about where he is emotionally, how he did that. And when someone mentioned when someone mentions the jukebox, he starts talking about his grandma and her jukebox and how she only had like this one artist on there, and it just keeps going on, and that's actually kind of funny. Luis still provides some humor in that regard. There are some jokes here and there that I think are funny, especially during the action scenes when they're with the giant Pez dispenser. I thought that was amusing. So there is still plenty of fun there, and the action scenes are really nice and still really creative and fun to watch, especially when we got two people who can shrink and see the capabilities, especially with the Wasp, since she actually has features in her suit that Scott doesn't have in hers, and in his, sorry. And as such, allowing her to fly around with wings, actually able to zap people with her hands. It's actually a lot of fun, and is really cool to watch. It is really entertaining to watch, especially the chase scenes. It also helps that they've been able to shrink the car, so it allows them to get more angles and how they can do things. It allows for more creative setups and payoffs, especially and allowing them to use more creative weapons and how they fight. It's really fun, and I love seeing it. And I think another scene I liked was when Scott was giant and thus rose above the giant ship to get the lab away from Sonny. So I like that. I do like that. Is plenty to like. And again, the characters are still likable and fun. They do still have their own arcs that I do think are interesting and are fun to watch. I just think the biggest problems with the film are it feels cluttered because it feels like there are too many conflicting plots that don't feel like they mesh together. Sonny, and one of those plots, unfortunately, is annoying, and I don't care that much for it. And while the humor can be good most of the time, there are a few moments, aka the Scott suit malfunction moments, that I think just kind of fall flat. Otherwise, though, I think the film is pretty decent. It's okay, but that's all it is. It's okay. It's just meant to be a nice little breather after such a big film like Infinity War, and as a breather film goes, I think it does the job well. It's entertaining to watch, decent. Doesn't really do much in the grand scheme of things except show what Scott was doing while also setting up some stuff for Endgame. So, yeah. At the end of the day, it's a cute little movie. Nothing great, but it's okay. And that's all it is. It's just okay. Nothing horrible about it. Plenty of stuff to like. But in the end of the day, yeah, it's just okay. So, yeah. That's pretty much all I have to say. I'm sorry I kept pausing this throughout the whole thing. Didn't really, but that's kind of what you have to deal with these vlogs. Not fun for anybody, least of all you, because I guess it leads to me going off on something and then having to stop for whatever reason. So I apologize for that. But hopefully next week will turn out better. As next time we meet, we're gonna be going back a couple decades as we take a look at a film that's kind of split. That fans are sort of split about on its quality. So, next time we meet, it's time we met another hero from the stars as we take a look at Captain Marvel.